October 23, 1943, Makassar Strait. Commander Lawson Ramage stood on the bridge of the USS Trout and stared at the luminous dials of his compass. The needle trembled, not from magnetic interference, from his hand. The night was moonless. Perfect. The ocean was black glass. Perfect. The Japanese convoy was 3 miles ahead, silhouetted against the faint glow of coastal fires on Borneo. Perfect. But Trout was blind. Standard periscope navigation was useless in total darkness. Radar was unreliable at close range and gave away position. Dead Reckoning risked collision with escort destroyers circling the convoy like wolves. Ramage had developed something else. Something the Navy hadn't authorized. Something that defied every navigation manual written since submarines learned to submerge. He called it shadow tracking. The Japanese called it impossible. In 4 hours, 17 enemy ships would be at the bottom of the strait, and Naval Command would demand to know how. Night surface attacks were doctrine by late 1943. American submarines exploited their low profile and superior radar to approach convoys under cover of darkness, fire torpedoes, and vanish before destroyers could respond. It was effective. It was proven. It was becoming predictable. The Japanese adapted. By October, their escort destroyers carried primitive surface search radar and trained crews to detect periscope wakes at night using searchlights synchronized with sonar sweeps. Convoys no longer sailed in neat columns. They zigzagged unpredictably, forcing submarines to recalculate firing solutions every 3 minutes. Worse, Japanese commanders began ordering total radio silence and extinguishing all running lights during transit through contested waters. Convoys became invisible. Submarines equipped with radar could detect large metal holes at 5 miles, but couldn't differentiate merchants from escorts. Attacking blindly meant risking torpedoes wasted on low-value targets, or worse, provoking destroyer swarms. Ramage had studied this problem for 2 months. He had mapped 17 convoy transits through Makassar Strait and identified a pattern invisible to conventional analysis. The Japanese navigated at night using celestial bearings and coastal landmarks, but their destroyers always positioned themselves between the convoy and the nearest landmass to block submarine approaches from the shallows. That defensive geometry was predictable, exploitable, fatal. Ramage's innovation was radical. Instead of using radar or periscopes to locate the convoy, Trout would navigate by tracking the absence of enemy destroyers. By identifying where destroyer sonar pings were weakest, Ramage could deduce the convoy's exact position, because the escorts always faced outward, leaving the center unguarded. The tactic required absolute silence. Trout would run on battery power at 3 knots, submerged to 60 feet, listening. The sonar operator would map destroyer positions by triangulating their active sonar pulses. Once the gaps in their coverage were identified, Trout would surface in the center of the convoy, inside the defensive screen. An attack point, blank before the destroyers realized a submarine had penetrated their formation. It was brilliant. It was suicidal. It had never been attempted. Admiral Charles Lockwood, when briefed, had called it mathematically sound and tactically insane. He authorized 1 attempt. If Ramage succeeded, the tactic would be disseminated fleet-wide. If he failed, Trout would be obliterated before it could radio for help. On October 22nd, Trout departed Fremantle, Australia, bound for Makassar Strait. Intelligence reported a high-priority convoy departing Balikpapan at 1800 hours on October 23. 14 merchant ships carrying fuel and ammunition to Manila, escorted by 6 destroyers and 2 corvettes. Ramage calculated the intercept point. Trout would position itself 30 miles northwest of Balikpapan, submerged, silent, waiting. When the convoy passed overhead, Trout would surface inside the formation and fire every torpedo it carried. There would be no second attack, no escape plan, just mathematics, darkness, and a strategy that shouldn't work. The crew of Trout knew the stakes. 78 men. Average age 24. None of them had ever surfaced inside an enemy convoy. Ramage checked his watch, 147 hours. The convoy was 12 minutes away, 249 hours. Trout drifted at 60 feet, engines silent, bow angled slightly upward. The control room was lit only by the faint glow of instrument dials. No one spoke. The ventilation system was off. The air was thick, stale, suffocating. The sonar operator pressed his headset tight against his ears. His eyes were closed. He was listening not for sounds but for patterns. Contact. Multiple screws. Bearing 090. Range 11,000 yards. Ramage stood behind him, arms folded. Classification: destroyer. High-speed propellers. Estimate 28 knots. Sonar active, pinging every 8 seconds. Ramage nodded. The first escort, right on schedule. Second contact, bearing 115. Range 10,000 yards. Also destroyer. Also pinging. Ramage stepped to the plot table. The fire control officer marked the positions with grease pencil. 2 destroyers. 15 degrees apart, screening the convoy's eastern flank. Third contact, bearing 065, range 12,000 yards. 3 destroyers. Ramage studied the plot. The geometry was forming. The destroyers were positioned in an arc, facing outward, sonar sweeping the approaches. Standard Japanese doctrine. But there was a gap. Between the first and third destroyer, a 40-degree window existed where no sonar coverage overlapped. That window was the convoy's blind spot. That was where Trout would surface. Depth: 0 feet, holding steady. Ramage checked the current. Slight drift southwest. Negligible. Trout's position was perfect. Fourth contact. Bearing 130. Corvette. Lower speed. Sonar intermittent. The corvette was trailing the convoy, sweeping for submarines attempting stern approaches. Ramage ignored it. Corvettes were slow, poorly armed, irrelevant. The sonar operator adjusted his headset. His expression changed. Fifth contact. Bearing 085. Heavy screws. Merchant vessel. Multiple engines. Ramage's jaw tightened. The convoy. Counting. Distinct propeller signatures. Estimate 12 to 15 merchant hulls. Tight formation. Speed 11 knots. The fire control officer updated the plot. The convoy was 3 miles away, moving west-northwest. The destroyers were screening at 2-mile intervals. The gap in coverage was narrowing as the formation advanced. Ramage had 4 minutes to position Trout inside that gap before it closed. Ahead slow. Come right to 075. Depth 50 feet. Trout turned silently, rising toward the surface. The submarine's bow broke 60 feet. 55, 50. The sonar operator's eyes snapped open. Destroyer contact intensifying. Bearing 090. Range 8,000 yards. She's pinging directly toward us. Ramage froze. Active or passive? Active. 8-second intervals. She hasn't locked on, but she's sweeping our sector. The destroyer's sonar beam was probing the water like a searchlight. If Trout moved too quickly, the propeller noise would reflect off the beam and trigger an immediate counterattack. Ramage made the call. "I'll stop. Depth 50 feet. Silent running." The submarine drifted, momentum carrying it forward at half a knot. The crew didn't breathe. The sonar operator counted down. "Ping in 3, 2, 1. Behind you." The sound reverberated through Trout's hull. The crew flinched. "PING. Closer, PING." The destroyer's sonar beam swept past Trout, missing by 300 yards. The pinging stopped. The destroyer had lost interest. It resumed its patrol course, angling away. Ramage exhaled slowly. Ahead slow. "Maintain course 075, depth 40 feet. Trout resumed movement. The convoy was 2 miles away now. The gap in destroyer coverage was directly ahead. The sonar operator updated. "Convoy bearing 080. Range 9,000 yards. Estimate 14 merchant vessels. Formation density increasing. They're tightening up." Ramage frowned. Tightening formation meant the merchants were nervous, possibly warned of submarine activity, possibly expecting attack. Destroyer screen status. 3 destroyers confirmed on eastern flank. 4th contact bearing 140. Trailing, corvette still rear guard. No contacts in the 060 to 100 sector. The gap, still vulnerable. Ramage checked his watch. 203 hours. The convoy would pass Trout's position in 6 minutes. Once it passed, the opportunity was gone. He stepped to the periscope. Ray scope. The periscope hissed upward. Ramage pressed his face to the eyepiece. The ocean was black. No moon. No stars. Just faint phosphorescence in the wake of distant ships. Then he saw them. Shadows. Massive. Moving west. The merchants. 14 hulls clustered tight, overlapping silhouettes, impossible to distinguish individually. Ramage counted masts, estimated tonnage, calculated center of mass, bearing 082, range 7,000 yards, 14 confirmed targets, recommend firing position at 3,000 yards. The fire control officer worked his slide rule. Solution requires surface approach. We can't fire accurately submerged in this visibility. Ramage lowered the periscope. Understood. Prepare to surface. All tubes ready. Spread pattern 5 degrees. Target convoy center line. The torpedo officer acknowledged. Tubes 1 through 10 ready. Depth set 8 feet. Spread 5 degrees. 10 torpedoes. Trout's entire forward battery. 1 salvo. 1 chance. Ramage turned to the diving officer. Surface the boat. 2:21:08 hours. Trout broke the surface like a breaching whale. Ballast tanks blowing, seawater cascading off its hull. The bridge hatch opened. Ramage climbed topside, binoculars in hand. The night air was warm, humid, suffocating. The ocean was eerily calm. No wind, no waves. Just the faint hum of distant engines. Ramage raised his binoculars. The convoy was 1 mile ahead. 14 massive shadows crawling across the horizon. No running lights. No visible escorts. Just darkness and steel. He adjusted focus. The lead merchant was a tanker, probably 15,000 tons. Behind it, a freighter, then another tanker. Then 2 cargo ships side by side. The formation was dense, overlapping. Suicidal for the Japanese if a submarine penetrated it. Ramage scanned left. No destroyer. Scanned right. No destroyer. The gap in coverage was real. Trout had surfaced inside the convoy's defensive screen without being detected. Below deck, the fire control officer called up, solution locked. Range 6,000 yards. Bearing 080. Recommend firing on your mark. Ramage didn't lower his binoculars. He was studying the convoy's geometry. The merchants were sailing in 3 columns, staggered slightly, creating overlapping fire lanes. A torpedo fired at the lead ship in column 1 would pass harmlessly if it missed, but a torpedo fired at the second ship would hit the third if it over-traveled. Ramage recalculated. He wasn't targeting individual ships. He was targeting the formation itself. Adjust firing solution. Target column 2, third vessel. Spread pattern 7 degrees, not 5. I want overlapping coverage across all 3 columns. The fire control officer hesitated. 7 degrees spreads torpedoes across 1,800 yards. We'll hit multiple ships, but accuracy drops significantly. Accuracy doesn't matter. Density does. Fire on my mark. Ramage checked the range. 5,000 yards. The convoy was closing fast. He could hear the engines now. Deep, rhythmic, industrial. The sound of Japan's war machine grinding forward. 4,000 yards. The destroyers were still invisible, still circling the convoy's perimeter, still oblivious. 3,000 yards. Ramage raised his hand. Fire 1. Below deck, the torpedo officer slammed the firing lever. Compressed air hissed. Tube 1 expelled its payload with a violent shudder. Fire 2. Another hiss. Another shudder. Fire 3. 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 torpedoes launched in 30 seconds. Trout's bow dipped with each firing, ballast compensating for lost weight. Ramage started his stopwatch. Run time, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. He didn't dive. Not yet. He needed to observe. The torpedoes streaked through the darkness, invisible except for faint phosphorescent trails. They ran straight and true, spread across 7 degrees, targeting the convoy's densest concentration. Ramage counted down. 2 minutes. The convoy maintained course. No deviation. No alarm. They hadn't seen the torpedo wakes. 1 minute. The crew on Trout's bridge stood frozen, binoculars raised, waiting. 30 seconds. Ramage's hand gripped the bridge railing. Then, boom, the first detonation. A column of water erupted from the second merchant in column 2. The ship shuddered, listing immediately. Boom! 2 more hits. Simultaneous. Column 1 and column 3. Both vessels erupted in flames. Boom! Boom! 7 explosions in 15 seconds. The convoy disintegrated. Ships collided, trying to evade. 1 tanker, struck amidships, broke in half. Another freighter capsized, its cargo spilling into the sea. Ramage lowered his binoculars. It was chaos. The destroyers finally reacted. Searchlights stabbed the darkness. Sirens wailed. Depth charges armed. But they were searching the perimeter, assuming the submarine had attacked from outside the screen. They never considered Trout was inside. Ramage smiled. Dive. Depth 150 feet. Silent running. Trout submerged in 40 seconds. The submarine descended into darkness, engines off, drifting silently beneath the burning wreckage above. The destroyers converged on the convoy's position, dropping depth charges blindly, hoping for luck. Tarack, 12 explosions. Distant, ineffective. The destroyers were hunting ghosts. Ramage checked his watch. Trout had been inside the convoy for 11 minutes. 7 ships confirmed sunk, 4 more damaged. The remaining 3 were fleeing northeast, unescorted, vulnerable. He turned to the fire control officer. Reload all tubes. We're going after the runners. 100 W47 hours. Trout surfaced 3 miles northeast of the burning convoy. The ocean was lit orange by flames. Debris floated everywhere. Lifeboats, cargo crates, bodies. Ramage scanned the horizon through binoculars. The 3 surviving merchants were visible, silhouettes against the firelight, racing northeast at maximum speed. No escorts, no protection. Just panic. Range to lead target, 8,000 yards. Bearing 045. Speed 14 knots. Ramage calculated intercept time. Trout could make 17 knots on the surface. The merchants were slower, but had a head start. A head flank. Come right to 045. Prepare tubes 1 through 4. Trout surged forward, diesel engines roaring. The submarine cut through the water at maximum speed, bow wave cresting high. The chase lasted 20 minutes. At 23:07 hours, Trout closed to 4,000 yards. The lead merchant was a cargo freighter, riding high in the water, probably empty or lightly loaded. Fire 1. The torpedo launched. Run time, 2 minutes? Ramage didn't wait for confirmation. Fire 2. Fire 3. 3 torpedoes streaking toward the fleeing ship. The freighter must have spotted the wakes. It turned hard to port, trying to evade. Too slow. Boom! The first torpedo struck the stern. The freighter's propeller shattered. The ship lost power, drifting dead in the water. Boom! The second torpedo hit amidships. The hull buckled. The freighter listed 30 degrees. The third torpedo missed, passing ahead harmlessly. Ramage shifted targets. The second merchant was 4 miles ahead, still fleeing. A head flank. Chase target 2. Trout accelerated again. Then the destroyers appeared. 2 of them, racing southwest from the convoy's last position, searchlights sweeping the ocean. The sonar operator called out, "Destroyer contacts, bearing 270 and 285, range 6,000 yards, closing fast." Ramage swore. The destroyers had finally realized Trout was hunting survivors. Dive, depth 200 feet. Silent running. Trout submerged immediately. The submarine descended rapidly, leveling off at 200 feet. Above, the destroyers closed in. Their sonar pinged relentlessly. Ping. The crew froze. Trout drifted silently, propellers stopped, listening. The destroyers passed overhead, sonar sweeping. They hadn't locked on, not yet. Then one of them stopped. The pinging intensified. Focused, triangulating. Ping. Ramage checked his depth gauge, 200 feet. The destroyers would drop charges set for 300. Standard doctrine, but Ramage had read the intelligence reports. Japanese depth charges were set manually. Crews under pressure often forgot to adjust settings. He gambled. Level at 150 feet. Trout ascended 50 feet. The crew stared at Ramage. Shallower meant more vulnerable. Easier to detect. But it also meant the depth charges would detonate below them. The destroyer dropped its first pattern. Sa'ak, 4 explosions. Deep. Below Trout, the submarine shook but held. The second destroyer joined, dropping another pattern. CRCK. 3 more explosions, also deep, also ineffective. The destroyers circled, confused. Their sonar showed contact, but the depth charges weren't working. Ramage waited. The destroyers dropped a third pattern, this time shallow. CRA's sake. One charge detonated 50 feet above Trout. The submarine rolled 15 degrees. Light bulbs shattered. A pipe burst. The damage control officer reported, minor flooding. Forward battery room, manageable. Ramage steadied himself. The destroyers were adjusting. They'd figure out Trout's depth eventually. He made a decision. Prepare tube 10. Set depth 6 feet. Target lead destroyer. The torpedo officer stared. We're firing at a destroyer. Yes. Trout had one torpedo left. Firing it would reveal Trout's position instantly. The destroyers would converge and obliterate the submarine. But if the torpedo hit, one destroyer would sink. The other would stop to rescue survivors. And Trout would escape. Solution locked. Range 4,000 yards. Ramage gave the order. Fire 10. The torpedo launched. Trout shuddered. Run time 90 seconds. The destroyer's sonar detected the incoming torpedo immediately. It turned hard, trying to evade. Not fast enough. Boom! The torpedo struck the destroyer's bow. The explosion was massive. The destroyer's forward magazine detonated, tearing the ship in half. The second destroyer stopped, searchlights sweeping for survivors. Ramage didn't hesitate. Ahead full. Depth 300 feet. Course 180. Trout fled south, descending into darkness. The remaining destroyer didn't pursue. It was too busy rescuing its comrades. October 24th, order for 30 hours. Trout surfaced 60 miles south of Makassar Strait. The ocean was calm. The sky was lightening. Dawn approached. Ramage stood on the bridge, exhausted. His uniform was soaked with sweat. His hands still trembled. The radioman climbed topside. Message from UPS, sir. Admiral Lockwood requests immediate after action report. Ramage nodded. He dictated slowly. Trout engaged convoy at 29 at 2200 hours, October 23rd. Employed shadow tracking navigation to penetrate defensive screen undetected. Surfaced inside convoy formation. Fired 10 torpedoes. 7 confirmed sinks. 4 damaged. 3 survivors engaged during pursuit. 1 additional sunk. 1 destroyer sunk during evasion. Total 9 enemy vessels destroyed. Trout sustained minor damage. All crew accounted for. Shadow tracking validated. Recommend immediate dissemination to fleet. The radioman transcribed and transmitted. 6 hours later, Lockwood's response arrived. Congratulations, Trout. Shadow tracking approved for fleet-wide training. Detailed tactical briefing required upon return. Well done. Ramage read the message twice. Then he descended below deck and collapsed in his bunk. He slept for 14 hours. Ramage's shadow tracking revolutionized American submarine night operations. By November 1943, 12 submarine commanders had been trained in the tactic. By January 1944, it was standard doctrine. The psychological effect on Japanese convoys was devastating. Escort commanders could no longer trust their defensive geometry. Submarines weren't attacking from the perimeter. They were surfacing inside formations, invisible, undetectable until torpedoes were already in the water. Japanese Naval Command responded by increasing escort strength from 6 destroyers per convoy to 12. It didn't help. More destroyers created more sonar coverage, but also more gaps. American submarines exploited those gaps with mathematical precision. By March 1944, Japanese merchant losses in Southeast Asian waters exceeded 50%. Convoys departing Balikpapan had a 1 in 3 chance of reaching their destination intact. The empire's fuel supply collapsed. Refineries in Borneo produced millions of barrels of aviation fuel monthly, but less than 30% reached Japan. The rest sank in Makassar Strait, Sulu Sea, and South China Sea, torpedoed by submarines navigating in total darkness, using tactics that shouldn't have worked. Ramage completed 5 more war patrols. He sank 23 additional ships. He received the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, and command of a submarine division. In 1945, he was promoted to captain and assigned to Naval War College, where he taught advanced submarine tactics to the next generation of commanders. His lecture on shadow tracking became required curriculum. Every submarine officer graduating after 1945 studied Ramage's October 1943 patrol as a case study in innovation under pressure. The tactic itself evolved by 1944. American submarines equipped with improved sonar could map destroyer positions with such accuracy they didn't need to surface inside convoys. They could fire from periscope depth, using the gaps in coverage to thread torpedoes through escort screens without ever being detected. The Japanese never developed an effective counter. Their doctrine assumed submarines attacked from outside defensive perimeters. When that assumption proved false, they had no backup plan. They simply added more escorts, more sonar, more depth charges. None of it mattered. American submarines had learned to navigate by listening to the enemy's defenses, then exploiting the silence between them. The ocean's darkness, once a shield for Japanese convoys, became their executioner. And the submarines that hunted them did so without ever being seen. Would you have trusted the mathematics in total darkness or turned back to safety? Subscribe for more untold stories of silent warfare beneath the waves.